are talking Street Trash from 1987, although a better name for this movie might have been Subplots. Now this one is directed by J. Michael Munro, who also co-wrote this. And this is one of these films that I never actually saw back in its kind of initial release on VHS. I remember seeing the VHS cover in the video rental shops when I was young, but never actually rented it out, so I never saw it until now. Now this has the reputation for being one of the most offensive movies ever made. What's the plot? And then we'll kind of get into it. So this has multiple kind of plot threads. The overarching one, I suppose, is there is this liquor shop which discovers this box of, you know, old kind of liquor called Viper, and the kind of the owner there doesn't really know what it is, but he ends up just selling it for like $1 a bottle. And this is in a kind of rundown kind of part of New York, and essentially the custom is primarily sort of the homeless, because it's only $1 a bottle. Obviously they kind of buy it up and end up kind of like pretty much instantaneously, once they've kind of taken a few sips, they kind of melt on the inside, resulting in some very gooey special effects, and this kind of happens through the movie. But on top of that, you've also got a variety of subplots, including a kind of a psychopath ex-Vietnam vet homeless guy called Bronson, who is kind of has quite the passion for violence. His little kind of group of minions. We've got these kind of two brothers who I suppose are the protagonists, although they don't get, there's not really a central character, but we have these two brothers that are also kind of homeless and serve as our, you know, are most altruistic, but only really, you know, by virtue that there's not pretty much else in this movie. We've got a corrupt, abusive police officer. We've got a kind of a gangster who kind of wants revenge for his girlfriend's murder. We get a kind of a, you know, a gang rape of this woman, and subsequent kind of necrophiliac rape by this owner of the junkyard, and a variety of other things as well. So there's a lot going on in this movie. It seems like it was somewhat kind of like hodgepodge together. It actually had a reasonably long shoot, 13 weeks apparently, but it did have some behind the scenes issues. The character of Bronson was, the original actor was fired you know, when it first started to shoot. They had to replace him with a guy straight away who didn't have any kind of prep or anything like that. So it had its issues back, you know, behind the scenes and stuff. So what do we think of this movie, now having watched it for the first time? Well, it's certainly an experience. I can understand why it has a reputation of being quite an offensive movie, because it doesn't really present people in the best light. Let's putting it mildly. Let's talk about what I think works. I think the fun, gooey special effects are going to be the main selling point of this movie. Think early Peter Jackson. Think things like kind of Bad Taste, that era of Peter Jackson, because this movie kind of reminds me of that. It's very kind of like over the top, you know, people having various kind of like multicolored bodily fluids spraying out of their kind of like melting bodies, all kind of obviously practical effects because of the kind of the age when this was made. And I have to say the effects are pretty good, you know. I thought the effects work here was quite impressive, to be honest with you, and there is quite a lot of them. The kind of the body melting sequences kind of in the beginning, and we get some more at the end, because the movie's so concerned with all these other sort of subplots that happen. But nonetheless, when we do kind of see them, they are quite grotesque and, you know, just as kind of like horrible to watch as you can imagine. Horrible, but fun if you kind of like, you know, gross up kind of special effects. There is that. This movie has got a lot going on. It certainly, I think, will keep you entertained, because it introduces so many different kind of ideas and characters in the movie. It ends up being quite a kind of fast-paced movie, really, especially for a kind of a, you know, a mid to late 80s movie, when, you know, maybe they took it a little slower back then. But yeah, there's so many things that are introduced. I mean, I don't think it was necessarily a particularly good idea on one hand, which we'll come on to again, but nonetheless there's so much going on, so many different characters, so many different themes and kind of like different kind of story arcs going on. Obviously it makes it somewhat of an entertaining movie. The aesthetic of this movie as well is everything is dirty, you know, everything is grimy and kind of like downtrodden and gritty, which I have to say, you know, it really looks like the sort of like the decline of the human civilization. If you were an alien and you were going past Earth and you saw this, you would think, no, you know, I'm not going there. So it's everyone has this kind of like, they're covered in crap, all the kind of the buildings are kind of like graffiti or like falling apart, things like that. Even characters, for example, like the owner of this kind of junkyard, so I mean someone who isn't homeless, is still covered in like dirt and kind of grime and stuff. The cop is just kind of like grimy. It's just like everyone in this movie, even our protagonist characters, they still are somewhat despicable in certain ways, you know. Our main kind of, I guess our main sort of character still sort of takes advantage of a drunk woman, you know, has sex with her and then kind of just leaves her, and then doesn't kind of ever kind of check up on her while she's being gang raped by the rest of the homeless people and things like this. So it's kind of like everyone here, even the kind of the good guy characters are quite, you know, not particularly kind of altruistic, if that makes sense. I think the issue here really there's two main issues which I would level at this movie. One, it's kind of directionless in regards to any type of plot. It introduces so many ideas and so many themes. It just seems to kind of like, just, you know, doesn't really know where it's going. It just seems that story-wise, it introduces what you think is going to be the kind of the main plot in regards to this kind of Viper liquor, which is this stuff that ultimately makes people kind of melt. But then it kind of sidetrack with this, a lot of times put on this Bronson guy who is this kind of psychopath homeless character. And then it kind of like focuses on this police guy and this kind of like mafia dude. You know, it just seems to kind of doesn't really know where it's kind of going. So I suspect it was a lot of this kind of making things up or rewriting the script as the kind of the movie went on. The director is credited on IMDb as a writer, but uncredited on the movie. So I suspect he was kind of writing stuff on the kind of the go, but the kind of the way you can kind of piece it together, and it kind of shows because it just seems really kind of disjointed. And as I mentioned before, this movie has that reputation of being pretty kind of like offensive, and it's definitely showing you the absolute kind of worst of humanity. For example, the scene where the one homeless guy ends up kind of picking up this drunk girl, taking her back to this junkyard to have sex with her. We get all the other kind of homeless people kind of like just getting like kind of like a peek of a naked woman. They're like they look like, the way it's kind of filmed makes it look like, you know, flesh-eating zombies. And they literally kind of pull her into the darkness afterwards. And then we just see a naked corpse in the morning, the next scene, and then the next guy who finds her ends up having sex with the corpse. So it's pretty kind of like, you know, it's pretty brutal stuff, to be honest with you, and quite despicable. It doesn't paint humans, certainly doesn't do any favours to the homeless community, that's for sure. So yeah, so there is that. I've got to say as well, I will say, just go back to a positive, I think this movie's quite well cast. I mean, the casting that they've got for our kind of our homeless sort of characters, I've got to say, I think they're well done. You know, they've cast people who've got kind of quite bad sort of dental work, for example, and they really do look somewhat destitute. I think that they were kind of cast quite well. Again, with the kind of the acting as well. You wouldn't necessarily expect it for this kind of movie, but I didn't think the acting was too bad, to be honest. I mean, for some of the characters at least, some of them just seem kind of like caricatures, admittedly, especially the kind of like the mafia guy and this kind of like this other character that he ends up having a bit of a relationship with, shall we say. But yeah, it's a weird movie, somewhat kind of like an oddity for certain, because it doesn't really have a real sort of central story. Some things are left kind of like just hanging. We don't really know the origin of this kind of Viper liquor. We don't really know what became of the kind of the investigation about the rape. There are certain things here that kind of just are left sort of somewhat kind of hanging. So it's an interesting movie. Certainly, if you like the gross out VFX, one to watch for sure. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. I think it's worth a watch if you like pure schlocky B movie, but be prepared. You know, if you're the sensitive type, then you might be put off by some of the themes here. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.